Hey, welcome back to Introduction to Apologetics or Defending Your Faith. If you would like to order a workbook and get a workbook that you can download with a license to print one free copy, you're welcome to do that at defendingyourfaithcourse.com. And if you're here with Shepherd's Global Classroom, welcome. You can download the Shepherd's Global app with all of the courses involved at shepherdsglobal.org. I'd encourage you to do both, all right? Welcome to lesson number 3, Is There a God? Is there a God is a philosophical question. The Bible does not attempt to prove that. It simply assumes his existence. And so there are some people, philosophically, who object to that before they get to Scripture. So today we're going to talk about some of the arguments about the existence of God. The word philosophy comes from two words, philos and sophia, which means love of wisdom. And so philosophy is the love of what we can learn about the world by logic and thought and considering the world around us. So is there a God? It's one of the ultimate questions of the concept of philosophy. So today we're going to talk about that and some objections and arguments for the existence of God. First of all, I would say you may not always run into an honest-to-goodness atheist. All right, you may not always do that. But sometimes you will. Our culture currently in the United States is more spiritual but not religious, right? They believe in an ultimate reality of some kind, which we'll talk about later in a lesson, but they're not particularly religious. But there are honest-to-goodness atheists out there sometime, and you may run into them. So what do you say to that kind of person? Well, first of all, I want to introduce the idea of deductive and inductive logic. Particularly, today we're going to be talking about deductive logic. Inductive logic argues from specific instances to a general principle. I notice that everything that I drop falls downward, and I reason from all those experiments or all those looking at these evidences up to a general principle that there is something called gravity that pulls everything downward, right? That's inductive logic. Deductive logic works the other direction. It reasons from general statements down to a specific knowledge, a specific conclusion. So, for instance, on your handout, in your workbook, you may notice this idea, all men are mortal, that would be premise A. Bill is a man, that's premise B. Conclusion, therefore, Bill is mortal. So we conclude from these broad ideas that there is a specific situation. Bill's going to die someday. He will not live forever because he's a man and all men are mortal. You see the idea, the logical flow from general statements to specific knowledge, specific reasoning. So you can even diagram these at times. So if you were to diagram out the idea of that, you might diagram all men are mortal. Bill is a man, therefore Bill is mortal. You would diagram this kind of way. All B is A, and all C is B, therefore all C is A, right? We can reason from general ideas to specific knowledge about something. This is deductive logic, all right? So I want to encourage you to follow along here as we examine some arguments for the existence of God. Argument number 1 is the cosmological argument. Cosmological. That word comes from a Greek word, cosmos, which means world. All right, so we argue from the world. We ask this question in the cosmological argument, why does the world exist? Why does the world exist? And the cosmological answers that question by saying the world exists because it was created by God, who is a personal, eternal, and self-existent being. So that is the argument, the cosmological argument. We look at the world and we say the world exists. Why does the world exist? The world, things that exist must be made, and so we conclude that God is a being that made, and he is eternal and self-existent because it is not reasonable to have an infinite regressive causes, right? So we conclude these kinds of things from examining that. Let me give you 3 unreasonable, okay, in other words, not logical, they don't follow the rules of logic, 3 unreasonable explanations for the existence of the universe. On your handout, number 1, the universe came from nothing. The universe came from nothing. That is an unreasonable explanation for the origin of the universe, because we never observe anything in keeping with that. Nothing comes from nothing. All right, so nothing springs spontaneously into existence. The second unreasonable explanation for the universe is that it has always existed. That it has always existed. And so it goes back as far as possible into an infinite eternity in the past. And the answer is that also is unreasonable, because nothing physical has always existed. We look at the rules of the universe and we say that's not in keeping with the rules of the universe. Everything runs down, the second law of thermodynamics. Therefore, it cannot be that the universe has always existed. The third one is that the universe came from matter or energy, that the universe came from previously existing matter or energy, such as the idea of the Big Bang, that there was previously existing matter or energy, even though it's compressed into a space-time singularity or whatever language people want to put on it. The truth is, where did that come from? It had to previously exist, and so it cannot come from previously existing matter or energy, because all we've done is move the question about where it came from. We just moved it earlier, right? And so in the same, those are unreasonable explanations for the existence of the universe. The cosmological argument runs like this. All right, I'm going to give you premise A, B, and C, and a conclusion. All right, so if you're taking notes on your workbook, here we go. Premise A, the universe could not have come from nothing. The universe could not have come from nothing. That's premise A. Premise B is, the universe could not have always existed as it is. That's premise B. Premise C is, the universe could not have come from impersonal matter or energy. There is too much order and beauty in the universe, and so it could not have come from impersonal, previously existing matter or energy. The conclusion, therefore, is that therefore the universe must have been created by a personal, eternal, self-existent being. A personal, eternal, and self-existent being, not bound by the rules of matter. So he's eternal, not bound by the rules of time. He's eternal, and an intelligent being able to design. So therefore he's personal, and not created. So therefore he is self-existent. So if the universe had a beginning, it had a cause. Frequently you'll encounter people in this situation asking who caused God, but it is impossible to have an infinite regress of causes. Infinite regress is a term in philosophy that means before that, infinitely into the past. It's not possible to have an infinite regress of causes, because it's a kind of infinitude that doesn't hold up logically. So if you imagine the concept of a train that is infinitely long and every other car is blue, and you took out all of the blue cars for an infinitely long train, and you took out all the blue cars, how much would you have left? And the answer is you'd still have an infinitely long train, right? Because every other car was blue, but it's infinite. So you can't have an infinite regress of causes. It simply breaks down in even the ability to talk about it. So infinite regressive causes, there had to be a first cause, or what the ancient Greek philosophers called a prime mover, the first mover who started all things in motion, right? There had to be a first mover who moved something first. All right, so that's the cosmological argument, a summary of that. It's infinite and impossible to have infinite regressive causes. There must have been a first cause for the universe. Argument number 2, the teleological argument. The teleological argument. The teleological, the word teleological in Greek comes from telos, which means the goal. All right, it's sometimes known as the argument from design. So in some ways it is similar to the cosmological argument, but the cosmological argument primarily focuses on existence, and the cosmological argument is sometimes called the argument from design. All right, so the one is the question of existence. The other is the question of order and design. I referenced order and design in the last conversation because we usually move toward that at some point when we talk about the personal nature of God and His power and all of that. But the cosmological argument is a little different than the teleological argument because the teleological argument focuses on design. Now, what question does the teleological argument ask? It asks this question: how did the universe get its careful design? How did the universe get its careful design and order? And the answer that it gives is the intricate design in the universe requires a designer. So the intricate design in the universe must require a designer. Information that is ordered is evidence of someone doing the ordering, right? We will talk more about creation and DNA and things like that in the creation lesson, but let's just consider for a moment the idea of DNA, all right? So there is order in DNA. The longest novel in the world is a novel by Marcel Proust, the French novelist, and that novel contains an estimated 9,609,000 letters and spaces, right? 9,609,000 letters and spaces. No one would hold that novel by Marcel Proust and say, this novel came about as random chance. There was an explosion in a printing factory, and here we have this novel. No one would conclude that. But DNA is a 3 billion character description of you. It's an interchangeable, interlocking system where sections of it interplay and affect other sections, right? And it changes the meaning of other sections of DNA. It is an incredibly complex system, far more complex than 9.6 million characters and spaces in that novel. But in fact, for a long time, scientists thought that only 1.5% of the DNA in our cells actually had a use. They thought that most of it was just making up the proteins in our body, and the rest of the DNA was just kind of junk DNA. But now they're changing their tune. They're coming to the conclusion that there's more to a symphony. It's kind of like a symphony. There's more to a symphony than just the notes, right? There's interpretation. There's a conductor, and the conductor may choose to play this section fast or stretch out certain notes or play this one louder and stronger or this passage more sweetly and softly. And the instruments that play and the sound that they make, there's a lot of that. And scientists now say that in the same way, now they've found a use for, a function for, some 80% of DNA, rather than just the 1.5% they thought had order and purpose and design earlier. Now they're saying there's a lot more that has order, and I would argue that the truth is they're always discovering more order. They're always discovering more design. DNA is capable of storing information on levels that we can barely even comprehend. DNA stores a 3 billion character description of you in less space than a period on the page in your workbook. You look at that period, and there's more information in DNA. There's 3 billion character description of everything that makes up you and your body in less space than that. It's incredibly dense. If we were to pack all of the info ever recorded, every newspaper, every blog post, every book ever written, every bit of every picture, every movie, every website, all of Netflix and everything else, if we were to pack all of it into the system that is DNA, and we could encode it into that system, everything ever created by humans could be fit in the size of a couple of pickup truckloads of DNA. Wow. The complexity, the level and layering of it. The system is perfectly designed. It is perfectly designed. Now, with all of that being the case, what you need to know is that if there's that kind of complexity, it is far more likely that came about as not as random chance, but by a designer. And that's the essence of the teleological argument. It is the essence of there is design, there must be a designer. Number 3, the moral argument for Christianity. The moral argument. What question does the moral argument ask? Here's what the question the moral argument asks. It asks this question: why do humans have an inborn sense of right and wrong? Why does humanity have an inborn sense of right and wrong? And the second question, or the answer that it gives, is this: humanity's sense of right and wrong comes from God, the supreme lawgiver who gives us morality. All right, so humanity has a sense of right and wrong, and that comes from the supreme lawgiver who has given us his morality. Now, C.S. Lewis talked frequently about this in his writing. His book, Mere Christianity, he uses a concept, a word that I have in your notes, and that is oughtness. All right, the word ought with ness after it, oughtness. And so he calls this something that we feel some things ought to be and some other things ought not to be. We have that sense that that is true. And even if we disagree about what those things are, right, a lot of times relativists or atheists will make the argument that, well, not every culture considers lying wrong, or not every culture considers adultery wrong. I know that's true, but the point is that every culture has an ought and an ought not. They do believe something is right and something is wrong. Every culture believes that that is true. And so, therefore, the question is, what conclusion do we bring from this oughtness that we have? Here's the moral argument in deductive form with 2 premises and a conclusion. All right. So, in your workbook, premise A: if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Right? If God doesn't exist, then neither do objective moral values and duties. Premise B is objective moral values and duties do exist. Conclusion: therefore, God must exist. That's the moral argument. And by the way, we find this in Romans chapter 2, verse 14. You can see that on your handout. Let me read you verses 13 through 15. For it is not those who hear the law who are righteous in God's sight, but those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. Verse 14, he says, indeed, when the Gentiles who don't have the law do by nature the things required by the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they don't have the law. Verse 15, they show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts. What's Paul doing? He's making the argument that all humans have oughtness. Even if they don't have a revelation from God, they all have an innate sense of right and wrong. Continuing on in verse 15, they show the law is written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times defending them. So there's an ought and an ought not, right? So this, verse 16, this will take place on the day when God judges people's secrets through Jesus Christ, as my gospel declares. So Paul is making the argument that oughtness is a proof that there's a lawgiver and there's a judgment day coming, right? So that's an argument for the moral argument for God. 3 questions that I want to deal with right now, because the most common objection to the existence of God is this objection: how could a good and all-powerful God exist if there's evil in the world? Right? That's the most common objection to the existence of God. I don't know if you know that, but it is the most common objection to God existing. And so I want to give you 3 possible ways to deal with that. All right? 3 possible ways. First of all, number 1, evil is the result of man's free choice to disobey God. So evil is the idea that is basically the removal of moral goodness then. So the idea is that There is no such thing as darkness. You know that, right? Darkness is not a thing. Darkness is the absence of something. When you close out light, what you have is darkness. It is the absence of light. Darkness does not exist. The same thing with cold. Cold does not exist. Cold is not a thing. It is the absence of something. It is the absence of heat. The relative absence of heat is what cold is. In the same way, we say that evil is what happens when we freely choose to disobey God. When we close out moral goodness, all that is left is called evil, right? So that's the first way that you can deal with that question. So, in fact, on your handout, moral evil is the root cause of natural evil, although it is not a direct cause. It is the presence of natural evil, which would be floods, venom, poison, hurricanes, cancer, right? Natural evil in the world is the result of moral evil. So when moral evil enters the world and we shut out goodness, all that is left behind is evil. And so that moral evil corrupts the world, has corrupted the world, and created natural evil. The second thing that's on your handout that is important to know is that the problem of evil implies that there is a God. The very fact that somebody recognizes there is a problem with evil implies that there is a God. So good and evil are inherently comparative terms. You can't even talk about good without assuming evil. And you definitely cannot talk about evil without assuming there's something better, right? They are inherently comparative terms. And so it implies then that there's a measuring stick somewhere that defines what good is. I can't say something is short without assuming that there is something by which it is being measured and it isn't measuring up to it, right? So the idea that something is short implies a measurement. The idea that there is something evil implies that there is good, and that good is the objective measuring stick. Evil is inherently comparative. In the same way, you might say if something is bigger. So I'm talking about bigger, and you say, well, bigger than what? Oh, no, nothing big. It's just bigger. Well, no, you understand immediately that the concept of bigger is a comparative term. In the same way, evil is a comparative term. Evil compared to what? Why would you say it's evil? Well, there's something better. Exactly. It implies the existence of a measurement, and that measurement must be God, ultimately. Number 3, God has provided an answer to the problem of evil and suffering. God has provided an answer to the problem of evil and suffering. People say, well, I can't believe in a good God. There's so much evil and suffering in the world. And I would say, well, the truth is that God's provided an answer. He's provided an antidote to that. He's done something about it. He entered history. Jesus came. Let's look at, on your handout, Christianity asserts that God has already done something about evil. The incarnation, the death and resurrection of Christ, and His future return, right? He's already done something. Secondly, Christianity asserts that God is still accomplishing the defeat of evil through the spread of His good news. So as we spread the gospel, we assert that the spread of the gospel helps to overcome evil. It overcomes moral evil, and it helps to assuage and deal with and treat natural evil in many different forms. That's why hospitals are named after Christian denominations. Have you ever noticed that? Frequently, Christianity has been the one that does the most about natural evil in the world. Why? Because we believe that moral goodness compels us to spread the news of moral goodness in the world and spread good natural goodness through the world as well. Treatments and help and therapy and all sorts of things, and health and wellness. We also deal with moral evils like slavery and things like that. We believe that we are responsible to we are accomplishing the defeat of evil through the spread of the good news. And then the next fact on your handout is that Christianity teaches that God has told us about this by revealing himself through his incarnation. Revealing himself, try it again. Okay. That God has, try it again, 3, 2. The next thing on your workbook is that the Christianity asserts or proclaims that God has told us about this. He has told us about the problem of evil and the solution by revealing himself through his word. All right? So we say, well, it's not a mystery. God has explained to us exactly how it came about, exactly what he's done about it, and exactly what he is doing about it through the Bible. He's told us why. He's given us reasons for it. So and solutions for it as well in the Word. And then the fourth bullet point on your notes is that God has invited us to participate in the easing of suffering, evil, and injustice. Oh, this is beautiful. The Lord has invited us to jump in with him and say, won't you be a part of easing suffering? Won't you do that? Won't you give? Won't you serve? Won't you be like a Mother Teresa and serve and labor among those who are hurting? Won't you be one who fights against evil and injustice and the slavery in the world or human trafficking or things like that? Won't you be someone who fights against that? Won't you be someone who labors to ease the pain of natural evil in the world? And then lastly, Christianity proclaims that God has invited us to participate in the final defeat of suffering and evil through his kingdom. So we are invited to the day when all evil goes away. God has sovereignly allowed this season of evil, this season of evil, and he's showed us, here's why it exists. Won't you participate? He has come and entered the story and taken the evil upon himself and has overcome and defeated it by rising again from the dead. And then he invites us to the day where evil is finally and completely defeated in his kingdom. That, by the way, is a beautiful way to proclaim the gospel to someone who asserts that moral evil is a reason not to believe in God. We get to witness to them about the coming kingdom of Christ and about how Christ has taken upon himself the suffering of our race and has defeated it and showed us the way forward and out. And that's amazing. I love that. So what will we do then? Well, let's memorize Romans 1, 19 and 20 today. All right, it's in your workbook. And so Romans 1, 19 and 20 says that what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, so being understood from what has been made. So we can look around and understand God so that people are without excuse. Fantastic. I love the truth of this. The philosophy of the idea of philosophy, the love of wisdom, and these arguments should lead us back to proclaiming the Scripture and proclaiming the kingdom of God. All right, so that's the movement of that. God bless you. We'll see you next time for session 4.